Welcome to another edition of the Mael Time podcast. I'm joined today by someone who worked at FIDF for over 5 years. For the purposes of being able to speak freely, she's not revealing her name. We're going to have a conversation about the situation and some of the revelations. And from my understanding, the goal is to help shed light on some of the issues so that they can be fixed and the organization can be focused on its mission without any of the outside distractions. So thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What motivated you to want to speak up here?
Well, several things. It's been several years, and I finally realized that I'm just not scared of what they can do to me anymore. And that's been a big issue for me for a long time, because there was a lot of retribution, and I really did not want to go through that again. But the main thing that urged me to do this was when I saw an article, I don't know which news agency it was, but it was apparently they had talked to a former employee. Oh, it was EJP. And she reported that they included the information, the toxic environments, in this report. But in the end, they told her that they did not include it in the report to the board because the focus, and I'm quoting here, because the focus was on, quote, business issues. And the other people, the other women that had experienced harassment at FIDF, testimonies were not included in the final report. That right there goes to the main issue of this organization, and its dysfunction. If they're not going to include the issues with the employees and how they're being harassed, then the organization itself is going to implode. You cannot have an organization and rely on your employees to raise money and at the same time have such a toxic work environment. And I know of what I speak because I went through it for many years. If it's okay, I have something that I'd like to read, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. This is a platform for you. And again, people should understand that, and I know from our previous discussion that the reason you're speaking up is, again, to help. So please go ahead.
It is, because I did know of many other people in the organization, mainly of the females, who went through maybe not what I went through, maybe worse. Some of them just did not tell me the whole story, but I knew that it was pretty bad. And I knew that the work environment in many of the offices and many of the chapters, because the way FIDF works is that the headquarters is in New York, but they have chapters all over the country, and the chapters are made up usually of a director and what they used to call a development associate, which was what my position was called. Now they call it something else, I don't know. But it's basically, that's it. There is no one else in the office. And so the director has free reign to really do whatever they want. And there was never any control. And that was a big, big issue. And they didn't even have an HR department until, I don't even remember, but it's been several years, but there was never even an HR department. And even when they did have an HR department, they were never supported to help staff who were going through things like what I went through. And I know that for a fact because I lived through it. So if it's okay with you, I do have something I want to read that I prepared.
Please go ahead.
I think it'll give people a very, very good idea of what happened and what the issues were. As I said, after reading the many reports recently published regarding the treatment of staff and the hostile work environment, I decided that I wanted to share my personal experiences. I just want to add that I worked for FIDF 7.5 years. I raised, even though it was not part of my job, but I did raise over $1 million myself. I was not a fundraiser, but I did it anyway because I felt it was important, very important. And I had amazing, great relationships with all the donors. I was also the main coordinator for 5 annual galas, and the galas were the main fundraiser of the year. We worked several months in advance, if not 3-4 months in advance, to prepare for the galas, 24/7. So that was something that I did. There was an email that was sent to several people by my former coworker, which really gives a very good description of the atmosphere in our office. And I think it's important that people hear this because it really describes the unfortunate circumstances that her and I were meant to be in. If you hear the word coworker, that is meant to, it refers to me. The email reads, I started at FIDF with limited experience in marketing development and sales. I am hardworking, having graduated with a law degree. By the way, this is not me writing it. This was my former coworker. I just want to make that clear. I have a law degree and I was eager to learn. Unfortunately for me, he, and she's talking about our director, constantly treated me as though I was worthless. He would make snide comments about my intelligence and capability. He would correct my emails as though even a simple task was impossible for someone like me. He would take credit for my ideas and then dismiss other ideas. It was disheartening and made me feel worthless. It was also very confusing because I started to believe the things he was telling me. But as soon as I came to a place of defeat, he would start telling me how great I was doing. He would be kind and friendly, and I would start to think it was all in my head. One moment, he would be a great boss, telling me how great I was, and the next, he would be yelling or treating me like I was worthless. It was psychological mind games. His temper was intense. When I left the company, I truly felt like an abused woman who was finally free of her abuser. He would often try and get my coworker, meaning me, or me and on his team by talking bad about one another or donors. He had one donor in particular, a very high-end donor, who he would constantly tell us negative things about. We believed him and would play into his dislike of this person. He needed validation and was extremely manipulative. He was insecure and constantly seeking approval. He desperately wanted a relationship, but would also make inappropriate or degrading comments about women. He would take pictures of my coworker, again meaning me, without her consent, and hang them throughout the office. He thought this was funny. It was completely inappropriate. He would pretend to touch my coworker. Again, this was something he thought was funny. He would get within millimeters of her and tell her he was joking or that he wouldn't actually touch her. Still, the mere attempt was completely uncalled for, and regardless of his belief that it was innocent fun, it was harassment. I'm sure there are a plethora of examples that show his true colors. I'm lucky I've had no contact with him since leaving FIDF. I feel absolutely terrible for my coworker and her family. In my opinion, which I'll talk about later, in my opinion, he is a narcissist and likely not capable of change. I cannot express enough the damage he did to my self-worth. As I have thought over my employment with FIDF, I realize that this is important for me to share this in order to heal my own trauma, and it was trauma. It is not just hating or disliking him. I am incredibly sad that my coworker has to relive the trauma we experience over and over. Some of the harassment issues that she just spoke about were, as she said, he would expect me to hug and kiss him when he left the office or returned from a trip. I refused, and he retaliated by posting photos of me all over the office. He was aware that I am an observant Jewish woman and that these actions do not align with my religious practices and were very offensive, but that didn't matter to him. He created a short song about not touching me and held his finger just above my shoulder as he sang it. I can still visualize this 10 years later. I visualize it like it was yesterday. During heavy rain and flooding, I ran to move my car to higher ground. He filmed me from the building entrance, later adding music to the video, and laughed as he showed it to me in the office. And by the way, many times he would throw, when he walked in the morning, he would throw his briefcase at my coworker, the one that just wrote the email I read. And she actually resigned after working there for 7 months. But that email was written by her to make people aware of what happened. She wanted to make sure that it was on record. and it wasn't just me complaining. Of course, all of this was reported to the New York Home Office and appropriate staff. I have extensive documentation. At that time, back then at FIDF, there was no HR department, and the former CFO, Chief Financial Officer, had handled these issues and assured me in many emails they would be addressed. Nothing was ever done. The previous CEO's priority was not focused on the work environment. Fundraising took priority. The lay leaders I worked with and had an excellent working relationship confided in me the difficulty they had working with this director. They even spoke to the previous CEO about his job performance. Well, after 2 years, the response was to ask this director to submit his resignation. No, they did not fire him. They asked him to submit his resignation. And if you can believe it, they provided him a severance package. So yes, he was compensated for the abuse and harassment. He was never held accountable for his actions. He was let go. He was let go with dignity and self-respect. The New York office didn't want to discuss my situation and offered neither an apology nor support. Even after he left FIDF, the harassment resumed in a new form. This is what I was referring to before. Several years later, he actually moved into my community, knowing full well I lived there. Despite continued discussions with New York staff and HR, when they finally formed an HR department, over the ongoing situation, nothing was offered to provide any support in dealing with this horrible situation. He was never held accountable for his actions, and as a result, regarded them lightly, like they were a big joke. For many days, anxiety prevented me from going to work. I even had a letter from a therapist due to the hostile environment in my own neighborhood. So it went from my work environment to my home environment. When I asked for support, HR and the newly appointed COO, which I'm not going to name his name, but he's the current COO, told me to get over it, stop complaining, and just move on. That was how he handled it. Despite my repeated grievances, the situation persisted until my family was forced to relocate. We had to move from our home and our neighborhood. And being Orthodox, that was our neighborhood where it was our shul. It was everything to us because being Orthodox, that's how you live in your community. The current CEO and company attorney were aware of this whole story and how I now had to deal with it in my community. The toxic culture at FIDF was unfortunately familiar to many, not just myself. Power harassment in the workplace often involves an abuse of authority, where someone in a position of power uses it to mistreat or demean someone of a lower rank. The current COO, as stated in the staff report, often used his authority to bully me and others. A toxic workplace can manifest excessive or demeaning work assignments, public humiliation, or even physical or psychological intimidation. Sabotage directed at an employee can play out easily with these forms of abuse of power. For example, after my third director, yes, in 7.5 years, I had 3 directors, was brought on board with no fundraising experience, I was asked by the regional director to help her understand her role and responsibilities and to pick up the duties until they were up to speed, until she was up to speed. Over the course of a year plus, she still did not fulfill her duties, and I was saddled with these added responsibilities. The regional director confided in me the ongoing performance issues with this director were not satisfactory. To make a very, very long story short, I'm trying, this person felt threatened by my capabilities, skills, and relationships with the major donors. As it turns out, she fabricated a lie that I was threatening her and solicited support from the past board chair, who was a national board member, and the current co-board chairs to propagate the lie. I was suspended by the COO without any discussion, investigation, or reasons, and told not to contact anyone in FIDF. 3 horrible weeks later, with no communication at all from FIDF, I received a call from HR, and there was only one question about this so-called threat, and I summarily denied it. I had had enough and resigned. With the ongoing harassment from the first director, this latest abuse, our family decided to move out of city and state. Let me just say and end this with this. Understanding the various forms and potential consequences of sabotage is crucial for employees to address and prevent. It's all essentially bullying or harassment that stems from a power imbalance. There was no support for those of us that experienced harassment, intimidation, manipulation, and sabotage in a hostile work environment. All of this can result in, and I think for FIDF has resulted in, reduced productivity, high turnover, and has damaged the company's reputation. I hope FIDF is listening and takes this to heart, not the quote, "it won't get reported because it doesn't have to do with the business," end quote, which is what the internal staff report issued recently. If you don't have a staff that is taken care of, if you don't have a staff that knows you have their back, if you don't have a staff that knows when they're being manipulated, harassed, abused, which is what has happened to a lot of us, how can you possibly know that the staff is going to work hard for you? Besides all this, I worked as hard as I could possibly work for this organization. I raised a lot of money, which wasn't even my job. And it doesn't work. And that is why and I thank you for letting me read all that. I know it was a little long, but I think it's important for people to understand what I went through, what my coworker went through, and to understand that when you're a staff person, especially of a nonprofit, look, nonprofits don't pay great. And so you're not working for the highest salary that you can make, maybe working for someone else. But when you work for, especially this was a Jewish organization, we were raising money to help the soldiers protect Israel. I mean, for God's sake, they let those of us that went through this just swim without any lifeboat.
Why do you think that is?
Because the only thing they cared about was the money. It was all about the money, raising money. And if you didn't raise money, you were gone. And even though it wasn't your job to raise money, if you did not produce, they had measures for the directors, which that was the thing. The director that abused me, harassed me, he never met his measurement, never. But the past CEO, he didn't want to deal with having to hire a new director. They didn't want to go through the hassle of having to hire people. So it was easier to fire the staff and let them be abused than to try and get a new director and train them. But it's all about the money. It's not about taking care of the staff. And that is my opinion. And I think that others would agree with me.
What have your conversations been like with your former colleagues since the first YNET report came out and the subsequent stories?
I have not spoken to any former colleagues. I was told when all this happened 3.5 years ago to not speak to any FIDF staff, and they were also told not to speak to me. That's how they handled the whole thing. It was horrible the way they handled it. So I was unable to speak to anyone, including my supervisor, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling, but I was told not to speak to anyone, and they were told not to speak to me. So I have not spoken to anyone, but they were full aware, all of them, what happened to me. They were full aware. It was on record. Time and time again, it was on record. And time again, I was told, get over it. Just move on, get over it. And so I haven't spoken to anyone.
You seem to describe pretty deep cultural rot, institutional rot. And how do you reconcile that with donors and people that go to these galas and have a great time? So if they were to show up, they'd say, everyone looks to be smiling, and, look at this picture of a smiling soldier, so it must be worth it in the end. What do you say to someone who thinks that it's generally good enough, or that people seem to be happy?
Because it was hammered into us that it was all about the soldiers. Nothing else mattered. And it didn't matter how we were treated. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The chapter directors had no financial oversight, zero. They spent money willy-nilly. They had American Express cards where they went out and bought expensive meals with donors that could well afford to pay for the meals.
You're talking about your chapter specifically.
No, I'm talking about a lot of chapters. But of course, my chapter is the only one that I know directly because I saw the expense reports. But they had, as I said, company Amex cards, and there was no financial oversight back in the day. I don't know what they do now. I don't know because I've been gone for 3.5 years. But I know back then there was absolutely no oversight. And the directors, of course, wanted to look like they were, big wigs. And so they went out and they took these big donors that could well afford. And I used to say, why are you paying for the meals? They should be paying for the meals.
And what did they say?
Nothing. They didn't have to answer to me. They were the directors. I was a nobody. They didn't say anything. It's none of my business. And I mean, I had enough going on with having to deal with that. But I mean, I had records of that in my file cabinet. I mean, it wasn't hard to see how much they spent.
What was the ratio, at least in your chapter, to the best of your recollection? What was the ratio between what was spent on galas and what actually was able to then be sent to Israel or to the benefit of the soldiers?
Well, that's an interesting question because, again, there was very little financial oversight, and that included galas. The galas was the big fundraiser of the year. That's what we worked very hard for all year long, to sell the tables, and then once they got to the gala, to sell the scholarships and this and that. And of course, we brought soldiers in, and it was a whole show. And I know that every year when we prepared for the gala, we spent a fortune on these galas, several $100,000. I mean, first of all, you have to pay for all the food. You have to pay to fly in the soldiers, any VIPs that were coming. You had to pay the hotel. I mean, it was a fortune to put these on. Think of a very, very high-end wedding. And the largest gala that I ran, we had about 750 people. That was the largest gala. Now, imagine how much that cost to put on a gala with 750 people. And then you can say, oh, but we raised, I think for that gala, maybe we raised over $1 million, but it cost us probably $300,000 to pay for the gala. So it was very disingenuous.
Was there an acceptable ratio or something where you were told specifically?
No, that's what I'm saying. There was no oversight. There was no ratio. I mean, they would tell us, try not to spend, but there was no you can't spend more than this. You can't spend more than this per person. You can't spend this on a hotel. This is the amount you can spend. There was never anything like that when I was there, never. So we just spent willy-nilly and spent what we had to spend to put on, because putting on the gala was the event of the year. So we had to put on the most fantastic, amazing gala. And as I said, it was like a high-end wedding. And so, but there was no oversight when I was there. And so people came and they saw this amazing, and I always wondered, why isn't anybody questioning this? It's like, here we are.
They're probably having a nice time, right?
Well, they were.
Right. So my question is, do you think that the current leadership structure and the way in which things have been constructed, to the best of your knowledge, based on your experience there, is it possible to undo this culture, or is there something bigger that's needed? Because and let me just preface this by saying it's really hard. You can't just instill additional managers and then have bigger chain of command. That doesn't necessarily fix cultural or other issues. So what's the step forward?
Well, I actually did some research on this because I knew you would ask me this question, and I did some research on this, and I have a couple of bullet points that are very, I think, and if FIDF is listening, I think they ought to really take this very seriously. I hope they take this seriously because, again, without staff, dedicated staff that is not being harassed all the time, any company or organization will implode. And that's just the way it is, because unless you get to the point where AI is running your entire organization and you don't have to worry about people being harassed, this has to be something that they immediately look into. And as dysfunctional as they are, there are ways to mitigate the problems. The first thing is they need to reassess the C-suite and the board. Totally reassess, which I know you have brought up many times in your podcasts and your articles. Number two, the board chair and the CEO need to bring in a high-level HR expert who will report directly to them and begin implementation for a plan for anti-harassment and anti-bullying to include training of all line managers and employees. Three, enforcement. That's the thing. They never really enforced a lot of their policies, and that was one of the biggest problems. Enforcement of zero tolerance policy. Whistleblowers should go to an independent ombudsman who directly reports to the board. The CEO and senior leadership compensation, and I think this is really important, should be tied to the success of this program. And one of the measures is to implement a quarterly pulse survey to measure employee satisfaction and the work environment. And all of this can be done. It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. And
it's really basic, actually. In fact,
it is basic.
Yeah.
And that is but obviously, according to what I read, they didn't want to even include, because the focus was on business issues. But this is business. Your staff is your business. And so how do they define business issues? When I read that, that is why I'm on here. That is why I'm doing this. Because business issues, this is business. Your staff is your business.
Right. And the way that they were talked about, allegedly, certainly in the complaint that I obtained, and it was later settled in February of 2024, asking if, which woman would you rather have dinner with and other things like this. That's not the culture that you want to produce in a company. I don't know that's necessarily the culture you want to produce not in a company. I would be very upset if any of my children spoke like that. So it's just basic human dignity.
Basic human dignity. And think about if it was your mother, your wife, your daughter, your sister that went through what I went through. I mean, I had to deal with this for 2 years and complain and call and ask for action and nothing. And then they give him a severance package. I got nothing when I left. After raising all that money and after working hard, I got nothing. Not even an apology. Right. And listen, it's already been 3.5 years and I'm working through it, but it definitely caused me tremendous anxiety and stress and PTSD. I'm not going to lie. And anybody, whether it's a woman or a man that goes through this type of harassment, because like I said, of this power thing, this power trip that these people have, and the way that they allow these chapters to run without any oversight. And I'm sure that's still the way it's going on.
So I think that there's been some change, at least I can see from the management structure, but I will say that there's been insane turnover in the management structure. You have all of these people that are there for 6 months, 7 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. I've never seen an organization onboard and fire so many people in such a way. So there's definitely, it's hard to actually build strong culture when you basically have a revolving door. That's very difficult.
And that's what I said, that all of this can result in reduced productivity, high turnover, and it damages the company's reputation. Well, I think 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah.
And I think all 3 of those, and they've done them. They've completed them. You know, so whether you like baseball or not, 3 strikes and you're out. Well, they have the 3 strikes.
And it's really an own goal, to take a sports reference, because these things are so easily fixable, and the cause really sells itself. Everyone who cares about Israel, cares about America, cares about freedom, cares about liberty. They want Israel to be strong. They want Israel to be safe. And they're very grateful for the fact that FIDF is providing non-critical but still important aid to soldiers. And they want to be a part of that story. They want to help keep Israel secure. They want to reward people who have just given up 500, 600 days of their life fighting to try to free the hostages and to try to eliminate Hamas. That is something that people want to contribute to. That's something people want to help with. And for them to be, them being the C-suite of FIDF, to seemingly not take these concerns as seriously as they should is really sad, because this is a moment that everyone should be unifying around the bravery and the heroism of the IDF soldiers. The story should not be about the nonprofit. But unfortunately, the nonprofit has been essentially run into the ground. And you have really fine people like yourself and others. And in the sourcing of my stories, spoken to now 22 current and former employees. And there are some really nice people. There are some really, really nice people. And to see that you have these amazing, nice people that have been basically discarded, or they don't feel that they matter, or they're scared that HR would perhaps be a conduit to get them fired. It's a very serious and scary situation, and it's unfortunate because, as we have discussed, it's such a righteous and noble cause.
Which is why I stayed. And people asked me, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you leave? How could you put up with it? And then, of course, at the very end, I had no choice. But I had to leave after what was done at the end. But yeah, that was it. It was the noble cause. Every night I went to bed and I put my hand on my pillow and I said, I'm helping the soldiers. I'm helping the soldiers fight for Israel. And so no matter what happened to me, I know it sounds self-serving. I don't mean it to sound like that, but that is really how I felt. And that is why I stayed. And that is why so many of us stayed. And then, of course, it gets to a point where you can't stay any longer, because then you just can't. It's too much. It's just too much, and it's affecting your mental health. It's affecting your physical health, and but to know that you're helping. I mean, I remember so many times they came up with these marketing. You know, we raised money to buy new mezuzahs because the IDF rabbis said all the mezuzahs were puzzles. So we had to, I personally called and raised enough money to buy probably 50 mezuzot. I mean, on Purim, we had this whole thing where we were raising money to buy mishloach manot for the soldiers. I don't know why we thought they needed them, because the soldiers on the front line, I can't imagine that they were worried about mishloach manot, but whatever. And again, I personally called and raised money, and I probably raised $5,000 for mishloach manot. I mean, whatever they told us, whatever the marketing department told us we needed to raise money for, we raised the money. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was, I'm saying we, I mean, I did it. And because I didn't have for several years, I had no director. I ran that office by myself. And I wasn't, that wasn't my job. But I did it. And I did it because I knew
you stepped in because you care about the soldiers.
Exactly. And that's why I did it. And again, I don't mean to sound self-serving, but that is exactly why I did it. And all I did was I asked for help, I asked for support for what happened to me. for how I was treated. And this is the first time I've ever talked about it openly. I've never talked about it openly before. And it's a little scary for me, I will tell you, which is why I'm not showing my face or my name, because it is scary for me. But I really feel, after I read what I read in the JNS article, that they didn't include it because it was all about business. Oh, I said no.
Jewish philanthropy. Yeah. No, but
no more.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
and
I
listen,
couldn't do it.
you're very brave, and this is also part of the reason that we have this platform, because and I just also want to be very clear, because the smears behind the scenes, they do get to me, and I see what they try to do. One of my objections in the Jewish philanthropy article was I was identified as someone who has an activist trying to, that's fundraising for a different way to help soldiers.
Mhm.
That's true, but that's very much outside of the reason why I have taken to the story. The reason that I personally have taken to the story is because if FIDF is going to do what they claim to be doing, then they need to be a strong organization that's built on a foundation of integrity, and the soldiers really need the support. So it's important that that organization functions properly.
Correct.
And I didn't like the misleading advertising and other things. But if you were to tell me, hey, Daniel, all we're going to do is fundraise for PTSD, I would say, wonderful, God bless. Let's show me how you're efficient. And that's very important. So it's not that I'm necessarily challenging whether or not they should buy gear or not buy gear. That's not the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue was the misleading marketing. And then on top of it, all of these other things came up, and you're saying, hey, wait a minute, none of this makes sense. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of craziness going on. And I know I genuinely want FIDF to be a functional, trustworthy organization. So just because you talk about it does not mean that you are anti or you have a goal of tearing the whole thing down or anything like that. They just need to be clean about what's actually going on and commit to fixing it, because the soldiers deserve better, the employees deserve better, and lastly, but certainly not least, the donors deserve better. Because if you're donating to an organization, you want to know that the employees are not being harassed while they're working there. They also want to know that you're not wasting money settling harassment claims or on group therapy, essentially, because you have to work through workplace issues and things like that. And again, certain issues do come up, but not excessive issues, right? And not systemic issues. And when a donor gives $100, expecting it to go to soldiers, as much of that as humanly possible should go to soldiers. It should not be, there's all sorts of other distracting issues.
Exactly.
And that's why I speak up.
And that is why I decided to speak up. It's taken me many years to get the guts to do this. But I hope it helps to urge others to speak up, whether they decide to show their name or their whatever. But I know, again, I know, as you said, you heard from many people. I know I'm not the only one. My story was pretty sick. What I went through was pretty sick. Sick meaning bad, not good. I know sick is good these days.
Yes, no, it was gross.
So old.
Yes, no.
I sound so old. But yeah, and by the way, I sent you a lot of proof because you wanted to see information.
I've gone through it, and that's the thing. Everything that we're discussing and that I've published, I go through extensive checks to make sure that it's correct, that it's accurate. We're going through and actually making sure that the T's are dotted and the I's are dotted, and the T's are crossed.
Right.
This is not some reckless marketing campaign, not to take a shot below the belt at anyone in the marketing department at FIDF, but we are very concerned about everything being accurate, not just throwing things against the wall and hoping it sounds good, or we're not doing salacious reporting. It is reporting based on verifiable facts and truth. And I just think that there's a culture that needs to be discussed for the benefit of the soldiers. This is, and I'll just add this. if you want to go raise money for any other cause that has nothing to do with Israel, the Jewish people, I wish everyone well. But when you, in particular, are going to the Jewish community and asking for money, and you are claiming to be the lone stewards of what the IDF needs, and you are saying that you're going to take care of it, you better have your house in order. And it's extremely important that your organization functions properly. So I'm sure that there are other nonprofits that have nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Judaism, that have perhaps similar issues. And if I'm being frank, it's not that I don't care, but it doesn't directly involve my community. It doesn't directly involve beneficiaries that I hold so near and dear to my heart. So the reason why it's so important that FIDF cleans up this culture and cleans up the spending and makes sure that as much of every single dollar gets to the soldiers as possible is because those men and women are heroes and they need all of the support. And it's unimaginable that they would not be getting every single thing that they need. And that's an obligation that FIDF very proudly and bravely stands up and takes upon itself. And I hope that it can get back to actually doing that. And it's a very serious issue, especially when you have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank.
Right. And everything you just said is the reason I stayed, and I stayed as long as I could, because it was so important to me to make sure that I would, as I already mentioned, I stayed as long as I could, and I did everything I could to help raise money, even though, again, it wasn't my job, but I did it anyway, because I felt it was so important. There was no director, and it fell on me to do that. But again, all I was asking for was support, some common decency. And I didn't sue them. I didn't go to a lawyer and sue them. I guess I could have, but I didn't. I don't know, maybe I was dumb, but I didn't do that. All I was asking for was support when I needed time off because of my horrible PTSD that I got from all this or whatever, or just, again, just some understanding, just some simple, basic,
You wanted basic humanity.
Basic humanity. And that was something that I never got. And I'm sure that there were a lot of other staff members who went through similar issues. I don't know if they went through what I went through, but similar. Everybody has their own story. And I mean, if you can just imagine what it was like for me to have
I frankly cannot. I frankly cannot comprehend that would happen in a company in the 21st century and there wouldn't be consequences.
I mean, him standing there with his finger over my shoulder singing a little song about not touching me. Can you imagine? This is what I had to go through. Or coming into work one day and seeing my picture that he took of me when I was eating my lunch on the computer. And he copied it, like 50 copies of it, and hung it all over the office. And I came in the morning and saw this in my office. I was sick. It was sickening. Being upset because I wouldn't hug him and kiss him and all the things that I mentioned. I mean, this is what I went through. And I was just forgotten after that, just forgotten. And then I still worked hard for the company and I still raised money and I still did everything I was asked to do plus. And if you have an organization where this is how you treat one, and by the way, I was in my 60s when this happened. I wasn't in my 20s or 30s. I was in my early 60s. I was old enough to be this man's mother, for God's sake. Okay? And this is how, they just forgot me. And so, yeah, I appreciate the platform. I really do, Daniel. I didn't think I would ever be able to do this. It's very hard. It's very hard to admit that I went through something like this. I look back and I think, why didn't I get a lawyer? Why didn't I sue? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I take out a newspaper ad and say what he did?
I think the answer is because you're so dedicated to the soldiers and you didn't want to cause harm and you perceived it would perhaps
it's so
cause harm.
True. It's really, really what it was. I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't do anything that would cause anything to dissuade people from donating money and our chapter being successful, and, doing whatever I could to help the soldiers. And especially when the soldiers would come in for the galas and I would meet them, or they would come in for certain events and I would meet them, I would pick them up at the airport. Oh my God, that was thrilling. It was absolutely thrilling.
I hope that the organization can fix itself a little bit. And would you be willing to go back and work there if they made it?
No, I'm retired. I absolutely, when I left under it was a horrible situation. Again, was the second one after in 7.5 years. It was the second horrible situation. They really did it to me the second time. And that was it. I left. I have not spoken to anybody. I don't care to speak to anybody. They know what happened. They know it's all true. It's all on record. I wish them well. I wish them the best. It's amazing if they can get their act together and do what they're supposed to do and help the soldiers. And if they can't, then let somebody else do it.
Thank you so much for joining. And I just want to, before one parting thought here, any supporters of FIDF, board members, anyone involved that wants to hear more of the reality, please feel free to reach out to me. Be happy to answer any questions. The speaking up and quote unquote whistleblowing is solely out of concern for the future of the Israeli soldiers and for making sure that donor money is directed with integrity and the workplace is safe for those who are trying to raise that money. At the end of the day, there are some good people in the organization that truly only care about the soldiers and want to do that. And it would behoove the organization to actually listen to some of the feedback and make these changes. And I know many people that have criticisms that would want to work with the organization to try to help them fix it, myself included. So this is not oppositional. It is solely trying to fix this organization so that it can best help soldiers that truly need assistance. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, and share.